Hey everybody, and welcome to IndieQuest, a celebration of the indie and obscure, your podcast all about the celebration of indie games, the people that make them, the awesome music, everything about those independent awesome games. I'm your host, Josh, and I'm here with my co-host, Steve. How's it going, man?
It's going pretty well today. How you doing?
I had a rough day. A little bit.
What happened?
Okay, so I got off work yesterday, and it was kind of raining a lot. It was raining all day, and my parking lot was flooded. So I was driving through the parking lot here, and I ran over a chair, a lawn chair, in the parking lot. So it was so flooded over, I couldn't see underneath the puddle. Like, I couldn't see the chair. So this chair got wedged underneath the front left side of my car and tore off some of the undercarriage in my car. So I thought I had fixed it last night because I was out there. It was rainy and cold, like low 50s, high 40s, whatever it was last night. And I was like messing with it, getting soaking wet, of course, because it's storming outside. I was like, all right, I fixed it. So today we had to go to Wally World, pick up some stuff. Driving down the highway, I start hearing a scraping sound. I was so frustrated. So I got out and I was like, all right, let's fix this right now. I could fix this. Because what happened is it's basically, it's nothing too major. It was like this like plastic thing that goes around the wheel well to keep like water out of the engine and stuff when you're in rain and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I was like, all right, I'm going to wedge it in here. And then when we get to Walmart, I can buy something to fix this, you know? I had to stop like 4 times and fix it pretty much on the way to Walmart. And I ended up buying this like clamp and then some more bolts. And I ended up fixing it in the parking lot at Walmart. But it was this huge ordeal. I was so mad. I was like red in the face. And Sierra was with me, my fiance, and she's just like, Josh, calm down. I'm like, I'm calm. I am calm.
Yeah, you sound calm. You look calm.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm anybody knows me, I'm pretty calm. Like most of the time, I'm like chill all the time about mostly anything. I don't try to stress about anything. The only thing that I'll probably stress about is like work stuff. But besides that, I'm like, it's cool. I'm chill. But dude, I was like heated. My face was like burning. Like if it was snowing outside, I'd probably melt the snow around me, you know?
That's never fun, man. Car stuff's never fun. It's funny. I had a very similar situation come up many years ago where I was driving to work. I had this old station wagon. It was actually my grandpa's station wagon that he had given me. And as soon as I basically pulled onto the highway, the muffler fell off, or like halfway fell off and started scraping on the highway. So I had to drive the whole way to work with it like scraping and making sparks behind me. And then when I got to work, I worked overnight at a grocery store. Mm-hmm. I went back into like the meat packing area where the butchers all had like hung up their white coats that they wore, and I stole one of the metal hangers out of there, and I unwound the metal hanger, and then I went back and I used the coat hanger to string up my muffler, and it worked, and I left it like that for years.
Yeah, and dude, we could do a whole podcast about car stories. Like, I had this old like F-150 that would break down on me, and like I had to like push it out of an intersection in a highway intersection. Oh my god. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think we're done with car stories. But dude, the coolest thing about this podcast is I feel like we've like gotten like an audience, a decent audience, and it feels like everybody's been pretty positive. And the thing I wanted to ask our audience is to review more on iTunes. Mm-hmm. I noticed that we did get one review from a good buddy of the show, friend of the show, you would say, is Round 2 Gaming, Mr. Dean Lasagna. He left us a really positive review on iTunes. He says, if you're like me and find yourself overwhelmed by the sheer number of indie titles that onslaught the gaming storefronts, oh look, there's another one, then this is the podcast for you. Host Steve and Josh are some of the best in the business when it comes to chatting indie titles, and over the course of each episode break down some of the gems that you might not have heard of. Better still, their handy companion log lists out all their recommendations so you can have a look next time you're perusing for your next indie adventure.
Wow. Thank you, Round 2. That is a very, very kind review. I'm glad you enjoy the show.
Don't usually put a call to action at the beginning of the show, but I feel like if you guys are just enjoying it and want to support the show, that is the best way to support podcasts, is to go over on iTunes and review us. So, enough about cars, enough about reviews. This episode is going to be all about our indie origins. Games that got us into indie games and got us interested in playing those smaller titles that are off the beaten path. So, what games or genre of games turned you on to indie games?
All right, so I'm gonna take you back. We're gonna go way back here, because I was thinking about it, and I was like, what got me into indie stuff? And I started going back, 5 years or so, and I was like, no, it's earlier than that. I went back a little further. I was like, no, it's earlier than that. I think where it actually started was in like probably right around the turn of the millennium, right around the 2000s. Did you ever have any of those old, like 1001 shareware discs that just had tons of games on them?
I definitely did back in the day, especially at Walmart. You could go in there and buy one of those for like $15. I feel like they were really cheap.
Exactly. And these were like in my mind, these are like the proto indie, right? These are indies before there's a word for indies. I used to play some of these, like this like block pushing game on one of these, and then there was this one game in particular. It was like a choose your own adventure game, and it was so obviously made by one person. It was the most just like crude, dumb game you've ever played. Every single screen was like a branching path, and you'd make one of two decisions, right? Like you'd come up and there'd be like a candle and a door, and it'd be like, do you want to light the candle or do you want to open the door? And you'd be like, oh, open the door. And you open the door and like a snake would jump out and eat you. And I remember every time you got a game over, the game over screen would pop up and it would say, you suck so bad at this game. So it was obviously made by like a 12-year-old or something. But I used to talk about that game all the time with people, even though it was bad and I have like no real fondness for it. I used to always be like, you guys got to play this game. And I wish I could remember the name of it now. It's like long since escaped my memory. But that was like my very early memories of playing like quote unquote indie stuff. The other, like, if we're talking proto indie before we really get into the meat of what brought me into indie games as we know them, did you ever play any of those TI-83 games on your calculator back in middle school?
Yeah, here and there. And I wasn't super into it, but my buddy just had like a bunch of them, I feel like.
There was one called Dope Wars. I remember
I remember it. Yep.
It's like you were selling drugs to make money, basically. And I used to play that one all the time too. So that's the earliest indie memory I have of playing indie games. Not exactly what influenced my taste. We'll get into that in a little bit here. But what about you? What's the earliest indie stuff you remember playing?
If I want to go back, I like similar to you. It would probably be proto indie, but basically just Flash games, like games on like Newgrounds, albinoblacksheep.com. Do you remember that? Yep, stuff like that. There was like a helicopter game I remember playing a lot. Bowcaster game, just a bunch of small like simple games. I remember playing Alien Hominid and Super Meat Boy on Newgrounds before they became actual like games, and
awesome.
just stuff like that, man. Like on there, it's just like a bunch of experimental and weird games that you probably wouldn't. Actually, it'd probably be a fun episode to go back and look at some Flash games one day. We could probably do that in the future.
I'd love to do that. Yeah. Is that helicopter game you're talking about? Was it one of those where you hold down the button and the helicopter goes up, and when you let it go, it falls back down, and you're trying to like keep it balanced in the middle?
Yes, exactly. It's basically Flappy Bird before Flappy Bird, kind of.
Yeah. So funny story about that. In college, a friend of mine who was a decent programmer, he programmed a version of that game that he called Screamcopter, and the helicopter would go up the louder the voice or the louder of a sound you put into the microphone of the computer. And so to keep it in the middle, you'd have to be like, ah, 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 ah.
That's amazing. I love it.
It was so funny. But yeah, I remember playing a lot of those early Flash games too. Did you ever play? This might have been a little later on in that era, but did you ever play The Crimson Room?
What's it about? I might have.
It's the first like escape room that I remember ever seeing. So it was just you woke up in this red walled room, and it's escape type game, kind of like modern nonary games or something like that, where you'd click around, you'd open all the drawers, you'd look under objects to find hints or keys that would let you unlock little other parts of the room, and you were just solving all these different puzzles to eventually escape.
It does have like kind of like a simple art style, because I feel like I've seen this game, or at least played it.
Real simple. Yeah, it's like MS Paint basically.
Yeah, I remember playing this too. That one's not like on the top of my mind, but as you were talking about it, it kind of drew itself in my head. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's one that I played a lot with buddies of mine in like probably early high school or so. But yeah, the Flash games, even though I wasn't a frequenter of like Newgrounds regularly, I would come across them through whatever means, right? People would recommend them, or they'd send a link to it or whatever, and I'd end up getting lost down the rabbit hole in those.
Yeah, and I feel like they were kind of phone games before phone games, because a lot of them are really simple ideas, like the helicopter one. There was also one I remember, which is kind of like a first person, and you're kind of going through gates that are spinning, and you have to like go through them, and it gets faster and faster, and just simple things like that. And I just have fond memories of that time and going to my grandparents' house, because at my house we didn't have internet at the time. Like, and this wasn't even like that early in the 2000s. It was like 2007, 6, something like that. So, DSL was a thing and stuff, but we didn't have internet at my house. But my grandparents had a 56K modem, and I thought that was like the coolest shit ever. And with Flash games, I would literally, right now you could click and instantly play. I'd literally have to click it and let it load for like 30 minutes almost, just so I can play it. So I remember doing that a lot back in the day and enjoying my time with it.
Yeah, those were all. It was funny because my mind went right back to that too. Like the first thing I thought of when I was thinking earliest indie was back to some Flash stuff, and then I thought of that other weird old stuff first. But there was one game that I played so much of back in the day, and I've never met anyone else who's heard of it. And in doing some research on it, I'm starting to understand why. But have you ever played Nanaka Crash?
I have never heard that name.
All right, this is a browser-based game, and it was like anime themed. So I think it's late 2000s. I think it came out like 2005 or something. You would start out kind of like a golf game. You would sort of like angle your character and then angle the power of your shot, and then once you did that, the character would launch across the screen and would like bounce off the ground with momentum, like kind of like hit the punching bag thing in Super Smash Brothers, when you beat up the bag to see how far it can go.
Definitely.
So it was like that, but there were these other like girl characters interspersed at like every 100 yards or something. And if you hit one of them, depending on which character you hit, they would change your angle in different ways. So like some would send you flying off, some would like catch you and stop your momentum, some would like send you in a really low straight line. And your goal was to just get as far as you possibly could along the screen, like get the farthest distance.
That's pretty cool.
And me and my friends group probably put in like a couple 100 hours into this browser game. We played it so much. It was definitely like the first big indie game that I fell in love with. But I didn't learn until many years later that apparently this game is based on like a Japanese-only adult visual novel. Or like adult game. And so I never like knew what the source material was. It was just this fun game we found. But apparently I was playing this like fan spin-off of some AO only game.
That's crazy. Wow.
It's a fun game though.
I bet. The thing about the internet is like almost anybody can make a game, right? Back in the day, you could find it. And I guess we could start talking a little more, zoom ahead a little bit, more of like what's, colored our taste more, I guess not presently, like in the last decade or so. I would probably start my like obsession with indie games with two different things that actually got me into it a bit, which would be a podcast called NoobTube. I don't know if you've ever heard of this podcast.
No, I never have.
It's an old school. Mostly on YouTube. I don't even know if they ever went to iTunes or not, but they had a couple hundred episodes, and it was kind of like before 2010. They were like sort of popular, and I used to listen to all their podcasts, and they would talk about indie games on there, like Limbo, and a couple that we're probably bringing today, like and stuff, and they talked about games I never heard of or would have ever heard of because I only real exposure I had to video games was going to a game shop and looking around. So hearing them talk about these games, I was like, oh, that's interesting. But one game, which it's kind of arguable if it's indie anymore, but got me into indie games originally, was Minecraft.
That makes sense. I think that's probably true for a lot of people. How early did you get in on Minecraft?
Pretty much right at the very beginning when it first started having a survival mode. So that's like late 2008, early 2009. The guy that was making the game, his name's Marcus Persson or Passion. I think he said his last name's pronounced Passion, but it's spelled Person. Anyway, they call him Notch. Nowadays, he's not a favorable public figure nowadays, but back in the day, I kind of looked up to the guy because he made this game that was like super interesting. Like you go into this infinitely generated world and make the world your own. That just blew me away at the time and kind of led me to kind of follow him a little bit as he was developing the game more and more. Just kind of following the path of this one guy. He just had an idea and it was kind of based off of other games. There's a game called Infiniminer, which is basically like a building thing where you use blocks to build out stuff, and that's pretty much what inspired him to make this game. Just watching his journey, he had a blog where he would go through and talk about like, okay, on this update, I'm going to add this and that. This was my thought process with this or that. And seeing that stuff like the Hell Dimension, the Nether, things like that. As I was playing the game and just loving the game and getting immersed in it, forming a community around it. I had a server I was a part of, which eventually I took over, which was over 150 users in it, and they would filter in and out. But just this game really brought me to realizing what one person could do. Of course, it has expanded immensely ever since. And it's kind of hard to say that Minecraft's an indie game now. But back in the day when it was one, maybe two guys, it was kind of like a really awesome thing to experience and kind of not really grow up with, because I was pretty much, an adult by the time it came out. I was like 19, 20. But seeing the last like decade of this game expand and expand and expand and become one of the biggest games, literally the highest selling game of all time, has been kind of a treat for me, and I still love the game to this day.
I mean, you can kind of, in a lot of ways, like sort of map the, I don't know, like the stock value, the share value, however you want to value Minecraft as an IP and as a game overall. You can kind of map that directly onto sort of the indie game industry overall, right? As Minecraft starts to get bigger and like take over the world, indie games kind of were doing it at the same pace in the last decade, right alongside it basically, and I think Minecraft is a big part of that.
I think it's the first game I've ever seen where, like, this is before early access was a thing, right? This was before a developer was like, here's a game that's not finished, you can play. And this is one of the first instances of that I've ever seen, because he put out a game with super bare bones, man. It basically just had like 3 materials and then like one biome. It was just the grass biome. Now it's like you can go to like deserts and all sorts of stuff. And it's like you can randomly, back in the day, you could either get a regular map or a snowy map, and that was it. Now it's like an entire world with a ton of different biomes and experiences to have and different dimensions and all sorts of stuff, and they just keep adding more to it, and it's just a cool game just to see it grow and grow and grow, and they're even updating it to this day. And from there, I started looking into other games like Terraria and just listening to more podcasts that would go into things like that. I think podcasts really, I wouldn't say define my game taste, but definitely helped me learn about games I never heard of in the past, like kind of guide me to like these littler titles that maybe wouldn't have been talked about before, or I wouldn't have noticed existed without these podcasts too.
That's awesome that they helped bring some awareness to that. My experience with regards to podcasts was kind of the opposite. I probably shouldn't be admitting either of the things I'm about to admit on a podcast about indie games, but I didn't get really into podcasts until probably 2012, 2013, and
Yeah.
even more and more in like 2015. So I was pretty late to the podcast scene, but I ended up connecting with podcasts not because they were recommending indie stuff to me, but because I was interested in indie stuff and I felt like other places weren't really talking about them as much. But then you would find different podcasts here and there that would mention these more, at the time, what I felt were more obscure games. And it was like, oh, someone out there feels the same way I do.
Yeah, and that's always a good feeling. And I would say I wasn't like now I listen to hundreds of hours a month probably of podcasts, but like back in the day I probably listened to like one. I had like two or three I would listen to like once a week or once every other week. So I mean, there wasn't as many podcasts either. So yeah, it is what it is. But that did help me a lot. And then just kind of getting interested in just trying to expand my gaming horizons, because I was just like, I used to play Call of Duty all the time. All I did was play Call of Duty. I play some Borderlands maybe. I tried out Heavy Rain, thought that was cool, at the time back in the day, about that time frame. And like I was like, I don't really know what to play. I usually just played the big games, but learning about all these smaller titles was definitely interesting. So, for you, man, like what's some early titles for you, and what got you really into the indie scene?
Yeah, so I mean, everything I mentioned up to this point was kind of like an interesting curiosity in my deep past, but definitely for me, the big thing that the main kickoff was Xbox Live Arcade, specifically the Summer of Arcade games like, Braid, Limbo, Dust, and Elysian Tale. Those games that were coming out on Xbox Live Arcade in like the late 2000s, early 2010s, Super Meat Boy. That's where I really kind of cemented my love of smaller, just kind of weirder games. Super Meat Boy very rapidly became basically my favorite game ever, or one of my favorite games ever. And I think coming in alongside that with all these indie platformers, quickly 2D platformers and puzzle platformers became games that I ended up really connecting with. And a lot of my classic favorites end up being platformers like Super Meat Boy.
I think that the thing about the like indie scene in platformers is they take a lot of inspiration. Like there are people that love these classic games and they're like, okay, I remember this game and this game, and then they take like little nuggets of knowledge and little gameplay mechanics from a bunch of games and put them together and make something unique. Or they take the idea of some game like Meat Boy. I don't know if they had inspiration from other games, but that's a pretty unique idea where you have to keep trying and trying and trying over and over again, each stage dying over and over again. But for me, I never had an Xbox until like a few years ago, so I never had Xbox Live Arcade, so mostly all my stuff was PC related for the longest time. So that's the difference between me and you on that aspect.
Yeah, I've always been a console person first, and Xbox Live Arcade is what really kind of hooked me. Although I will say, in 2011, 2012, 2013, that time period, especially the early part of that decade, Steam was starting to get really big. Lots of indie stuff was starting to crop up. Another big thing that actually is pretty responsible for getting me interested in indie games overall was the humble indie bundles that you could pay just a couple bucks for. And you get games like World of Goo, Machinarium, VVVVVV, Cave Story, all these like basically every game I just listed you can probably expect to see on an episode of Indie Quest at some point in the future. And they were all like so cheap, and this was at a time in my life where like the value was very helpful to me. Like I was very much needing to like pinch my dollar however I could. And so having all these awesome games for so cheap and filling my Steam library, it's like I could just randomly pick one, pop it up, and I would have like a totally unique, fresh experience. And then as a result of doing that enough times, it's like kind of just became my default mode of operation.
Yeah, and the thing about humble indie bundles is I've bought every single one of them. It's just probably you have too as well, right? There's like 20 of
Yep.
them probably by now,
Yeah.
19, something like that. And I agree, man. That's actually a good point. I actually didn't put two and two together there, but that did help me too, because there would be like this huge bundle of random games, maybe some I've heard of, some I haven't. And it's, if I have heard of it, it's an excuse to try it out. If I haven't, like, why not? It's free, or, it's super cheap, like $10 for 12 games or whatever it is, and I think that the Humble bundles were pretty cool. I kind of wish Humble would just be like that back in the day. I kind of get nostalgic for old Humble bundle, because nowadays they kind of do like a bunch of different stuff. So, I mean, it's cool. Their business grew. They have new, subscription tiers and all that. But I kind of wish they would have just kept doing just indie bundles over and over again, and not what they do nowadays. You know what I mean?
I do. I mean, do you remember? It was like an event back in the day when a new indie bundle would come out, because, one would launch and then it would be a little while. There'd be a chunk of time where just kind of like nothing was happening on that site. And then you'd hear the rumor like, oh, there's the second Humble Indie bundle is about to launch. The third one's about to launch. It was an ordeal. It was cool.
I remember the trailers with the guy, and they were like super cheesy, like, and this indie bundle. He had like a weird voice and stuff. Like, I don't know. I can't really do the exact impression of him, but yeah, I remember the trailers. They would joke around in them and stuff. And yeah, I have huge nostalgia for that. It's not even that long ago, but I still have nostalgia for it. Whatever. It is what it is.
Yep. I feel the exact same way. Isn't it crazy how something that wasn't even 10 years ago, you can already feel super nostalgic about?
Yeah, it's just, it's like a nice thing. It was so curated, and it felt like, I don't know, a little wholesome, right? You'd be like, they're helping charity too. I'm helping charity a little bit, and I get these great games, and they're helping the devs get exposure. It was just like a win-win-win for everybody.
Yeah. And I mean, you have to remember the context of it too. This is like way before itch.io was a thing. This is as Steam was taking off, but like in no other context in any other part of the game industry really could you get games so cheap. So when you were like, wait, I can pay $6 and get Super Meat Boy and 8 other games, it was like your brain couldn't process how good of a deal that was. It hurt. It was so good.
Yeah, no, and the thing is, it's not like they're crappy budget titles. They're Super Meat Boy. They're VVVVV. They're amazing games, like all-time classics now. So it was a great time.
Yeah, it definitely was. So that was a big thing for me. And then I would say, I don't want to get too close to the modern day, but probably the last big game that kicked off my more current taste for indie stuff and non-indie stuff was probably Journey in the early 2010s. And, playing that, it was just like such a powerful experience. And I was so floored with what they did in that game and how everything in that comes together without needing like a lot of story, a lot of dialogue, like this huge AAA budget behind it. And so for the last 9 years, I mean, I've kind of just been chasing that feeling again, right? Just looking for what's going to be my next journey. And I'm also a huge fan. These aren't indie games. I'm a huge fan of Team Eco, specifically the game Eco. And there's a lot of indie stuff that kind of scratch that itch too, of these just kind of like big somber environments, minimal storyline, kind of up to your interpretation, environmental exploration, stuff like Rime. So yeah, the Journey just kind of like sent me off on that tangent, and then my love for those other games kind of like steered the ship, I guess.
I think that we both would say Journey's like a perfect game.
Yeah.
Like, probably. I think let's make the promise now that we sit down and make a Journey dedicated episode coming up. What do you think?
You certainly don't have to twist my arm on that one. I would love to.
Yeah, because that's one of those, that was a big moment for me too. I'm not sure if it had as big of impact on me as it did you, but it definitely did have an impact on me seeing this. I guess to be a little crass, it's an artsy fartsy game. Yeah. a little up his own butt, maybe a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's a fantastic game. It's a piece of art. It's a masterpiece game. Just being a smartass, but yeah, man, like that type of game definitely is few and far between, but I feel like that might have led to a little bit of this like environmental storytelling type game, like a Gone Home or things like that. I feel like Journey was a stopping point or like a branching point for people to like get a lot of inspiration for some of this more modern stuff.
Yeah, I think Journey ushered in kind of like this era of, I don't know if you'd say like bigger budget indie or there are definitely tiers of indie at this point in terms of like budget and scope. There's stuff on itch that is like very personal, single person, low dev, and then there's stuff that is kind of in that Journey style that is definitely has a little more backing behind it, but is still definitely indie. And I think Journey inspired a lot of people to make their own version of Journey, basically.
Yeah, and I was so dismissive of Journey at first, of my first comment on it, but no, dude, it's amazing. But I think that what's his name, Joseph Ferris, from who made Brothers and A Way Out, put it pretty well. He calls them double I.
Oh, perfect way of describing what I was talking about.
Or no, was it him, or it might have been the people from Hellblade? It was the Hellblade people. I don't know. It was either one of those. But I remember somebody saying double I, so it's like pretty much it's independent, but they got somebody behind them backing them to make the game even more fleshed out and bigger.
Yeah, they have some financial support, but they don't have a publisher who's affecting the decisions that go into the game's development, basically.
I say before we jump into our indie picks today, I did want to mention one last game that I remember getting addicted to that was a smaller game, which was Binding of Isaac. And that was the first introduction to a roguelike game for me. Have you ever played Binding of Isaac?
For as much as I love Super Meat Boy, I only played Binding of Isaac a little bit, maybe 10 hours.
I definitely put more time into the original, because they had an original version that was more like, I think it was based off it was like a Java code. They used Java for it, and then they switched to a different code when they like made more updates to it. But I probably put like a good chunk of hours into that, and really enjoyed my time with it. It was one of those games that I hadn't really experienced that genre before, so it really got me like, oh, this is cool. You do a different run, and you kind of learn the game, and it's a little bit random, and that's I feel like that game really helped spin out that genre quite a bit too at the time.
Yeah, definitely one of the early roguelikes. And again, that's another genre that has like spiraled out and become enormously successful at this point. So you and I we're just picking those early games that kind of define a genre.
Yeah. Well, speaking of origins and defining a genre, that's what our theme is for our indie picks today. So, Steve, what is your first indie pick for today?
Yeah, so we both thought we actually had to walk a little bit of a tightrope here. We were like, all right, let's find games from our past, that tie into the theme of our indie origins, but not games, like a Journey or maybe like a Super Meat Boy that we think might be good for a more fleshed out episode in the future. But I think I found one that, to me, with Xbox Live Arcade being so impactful, is perfectly representative of it. I mentioned it before too, but it's Braid. So Braid came out on Xbox Live Arcade in 2008, very famously developed by Jonathan Blow. I was actually looking it up. On Wikipedia, they list the developer, publisher as Number None, but that page just like redirects to Jonathan Blow. Maybe that was the name of a company he had at the time, but I've always ever just known it to be a Jonathan Blow game. But so for anyone unfamiliar, somehow, if you like indie games enough to listen to the Indie Quest podcast, but not enough to know what Braid is, if you're that very sliver of a person, let me walk you through what it is. So this is a puzzle platformer, and all of the mechanics are based around time. The core mechanic of the game is that when you die or at any point you want to, you can press a button and you can rewind time, like Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. And you use that to manipulate very precise jumps, to navigate to new areas, and to just kind of like mess with the state of the world that you're in. And then they add a lot more on top of that I'll get into in a little bit here, but they start to get very devious with how they develop things. Anyone who just sees screenshots of this game, you might think that it's kind of like acid trip Mario, basically. Like it's Mario, but everything is like weird and dreamlike. And I think that that's on purpose, that that's the visual design of the game. And then it has a story that is very much up for interpretation. You get a lot of different theories about what it means online, but it was one of those early games that kind of played with a little bit of an unreliable narrator, has some interesting themes, does some weird stuff, and kind of has, I don't want to say it, I guess it would be a twist ending, but again, for the one or two of you that exist out in the world that 12 years later haven't played Braid, I won't spoil specifically what the story is about. I'll just say it's very cool. Before I get into some of the specifics here about how the mechanics really work, I'm assuming that you've played this before. I'm wondering your thoughts.
It's been so long since I played through it. I remember the quote unquote twist ending. People have talked about it. I've heard some conversations and some podcasts and some videos and stuff about it, trying to interpret what it means, etc., etc. But I do remember having a good time with the mechanics in this game. I feel like sometimes the puzzles were a little frustrating for me at the time, where I got stuck a few times, but I did enjoy this game back in the day when I tried it out.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, it definitely, it gets devious. I think that's a consistency with Jonathan Blow. I think that's true in The Witness too, where some of those later puzzles really, really test your patience and your understanding. They're tricky. But so, we're saying that this has a rewind mechanic, which isn't that novel of a concept for a game, really. I mean, there are other games that had done that at the time. But what really made Braid special, I think, in addition to it being developed by such a small group of people, was that they layered all this other stuff onto that time manipulation. So a couple of examples were, so they would introduce items that would not be manipulated by your time. So you like switches or enemies or things that when you rewound time would continue on normal progression, which completely opens up like a world of different puzzles and solutions that you can have. I think the one that I always jump to in my head as a cool mechanic is for one of the levels, the flow of time is affected by your left and right position on the screen, like your horrible, your horizontal axis. And so as you run to the right, time progresses forward, and as you run to the left, time progresses backwards. And so you're trying to like navigate around, do kind of loops through the level to get over to certain areas or to make sure that you're standing in the right spot at the right time based on you manipulating motion like that. And then it does some other stuff too, like it adds in some shadows of your actions that you need to either run away from or work with to solve puzzles. Introduces kind of these weird time warp effects that will slow down you or other objects that are in them for you to play with time. And I mean, just like Josh said, it gets pretty complex by the end. It is not an easy game. I think anybody that has made their way through Braid, they should be proud of themselves, because this is pretty mind bending. And
yeah,
oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, yeah, like it's a lot of sitting on a stage, just rewinding and unrewinding and trying to figure out the right placement for yourself or the enemies, and trying not to land on a spike, or trying not to get hit by this bad guy while you're trying to rewind. It's a lot of like doing 4 or 5 things at the same time to get through like this puzzle. It just it really tests you later on. Once you start learning all the mechanics, you really get tested.
Yep. Definitely one where sometimes you'll look at a screen and you'll be like, I can't even begin to fathom what I'm supposed to do here. Like it's overwhelming the amount of theoretical options I have. Mm-hmm. Or the inverse, you'd be like, there's just nothing I can do. Like there's just no way to get up there. But then you start figuring out that, nope, there's some weird stuff you can play around with. And what's cool actually is for the crazy completionists out there, they also have these extra hard objectives in the form of hidden stars that are in the different levels. And those help to unlock like a more fleshed out, complete version of the ending. But some of those stars really, really demand an absolute mastery of the mechanics. And in some cases, they demand a lot of patience. Like the one I remember, I think that is kind of the most famous one, is there's a cloud that looks like it's stationary in a level, but if you pay attention, it's actually very, 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 very slowly moving to the left. And you have to stand on this cloud that looks like it's not moving for 2 hours or something like that for it to slowly make its way to the left side of the screen so you can collect the star.
That's ridiculous. I'm not sure if that's a good decision, gameplay thing that someone discovered that they put in there, or if that's just something just to, I don't know, screw with people. Like, is there like achievements tied to that and stuff? Probably, right?
Yeah, I think that one is probably, I don't know if I would say it's malicious, but it's probably, knowing Jonathan Blow as a developer, I imagine that he is trying to make a statement about like valuing your time when trying to get achievements or something like that, like trying to prove how much of your own time you're willing to waste.
Yeah, to get that 100%. Yeah.
But there are some other very difficult ones that you can kind of puzzle out too. They're not all necessarily harsh life lessons like that. Soundtrack of this game, amazing. It's pretty diverse. It has some slower piano stuff, some string stuff. It also has some songs that are like referential of a lot of different cultures. Like I think there's some like Celtic stuff in there. Seems like there's some Indian themes and music. And I think a lot of what goes into the soundtrack being so diverse is that it has a couple different composers. Jamie Sieber, Shira Kamen, and Cheryl Ann Fulton, I know, all worked on it. And they each kind of bring a couple of different tracks to the soundtrack, and it makes for a very... It's consistently like relaxing and good outside of the like very tense songs. Really good study music, but it is very, very diverse. It's a soundtrack I go back to somewhat often.
Well, we know that Braid's an absolute awesome game. If you look on like top 10 indie games, like it's probably going to be there, or maybe, you know, somewhere around there. A lot of people would probably put this on their list of like all-time bests. But is there any other like random thoughts that you have about the game before we wrap up and do the quest log business?
We talked about this in the Origins section earlier, but I do think that Braid is pretty responsible for, if not putting indie on the map for a lot of people, for giving a lot of momentum to the indie movement. It really was one of the first big breakout games early in the Xbox Live Arcade that kind of triggered that indie boom that we saw over the following years. And I think that's true of both indie games and of puzzle platformers, both of which I think it had a large hand in influencing. Also, fun fact, this game, when you beat it, unlocks a speedrun mode, which to me in 2008 seems pretty ahead of its time. These days you expect speedrun mode. Speedrunning has gotten so popular, but back then that was pretty cool.
That's awesome. Do you think that they put that in there because of speedrunners, or did they just put that in there just because? Because I don't know how big speedrunning was at the time.
I think it was probably for other reasons than specifically to like cater to the desire of speedrunners. I don't know what exactly that was, but I still think it's kind of a cool inclusion. Not something that was common for that era.
Probably just something to add some challenge, to the game, right?
Yeah, there was an achievement for it, I believe, on the 360 arcades, like beat it in under 2 hours or something. So maybe that was the ultimate goal. I'm not sure.
Well, we do this thing on IndieQuest where we build this ever-growing, awesome list of indie games that you should try out called the IndieQuest. And there are 2 segments. IndieQuest? Really?
The quest log?
The quest log. And man, you think after so many episodes I would have got this down by now. But there are 2 segments to it. There is the main quest and the side quest. The main quest is a game that you're going to go sell your PlayStation 4, get a bunch of cash, and then go and buy this game 10 times so you can tell all your friends, hey, play this game. They're just gifting it to everybody. Using that extra cash to go get yourself a haircut and probably a nice meal as well. But you got to play the game right away. That was one of the worst ones I've ever done.
Them being bad is, I think, important. It's good.
Okay. But what I'm trying to say is you got to play the game right away on that main quest, and on the side quest, it's one that maybe throw it on your backlog, and when you're in the mood, check it out. So, is Braid a main quest or a side quest game?
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one. To me, I feel like Braid is a main quest, right? Both because it was so influential in its time, and I do think because it holds up really well as a puzzle platformer now. It doesn't feel like a prototype in any way. It feels like something that could have come out recently. Visually, even, I think it holds up. But, what are you thinking? Do you think this feels like a main quest to you?
I do, and they are doing a remaster of the game. Did you hear about that?
No, you'd think that I would have done my research in preparation of bringing it for this show.
They're doing they're re-releasing it on like the PlayStation 5 and Series X soon, and it's gonna have like a new like coat of paint to it, gonna run a little better and kind of spruce it up a little bit, remaster the soundtrack and stuff like that. So if they're gonna do that, I would suggest playing that when that comes out. I'm not sure when that's gonna be, but they did announce that not too long ago. So I do think it holds up quite well, and I think it's one of those must-play classic indie titles.
Yeah, it's really fun to play, and it's kind of a little history lesson in and of itself. So definitely recommend you check it out. Either that remaster, which sounds awesome, or if you're, it kind of in the spirit of the main quest, if you absolutely can't wait and you have to hit pause on this podcast so you can run out and download it now, as we recommend you often do. It's on basically every platform known to man. I don't know if it's on mobile, but I am confident whatever storefront you have available to you, you can search Braid and find it.
Awesome. So I guess it's my turn, huh?
Yeah. What origin themed game did you bring for us?
Dude, this might seem like a cop out. It kind of feels like a cop out to me a little bit, but I was trying to think of a game that was a little more obscure at first, that maybe people didn't hear about. It was first thing I was going to try to bring was Tribes Ascend, which is a multiplayer game that was super big, and it was made by High Res Studios. They make like Realm Royale and stuff like that, and that was like one of their first big games. And they took an old franchise and revived it, but upon like researching it and stuff, and I actually tried to play a match today. You can't really find a lobby anymore because it's a complete multiplayer game. So I was like, well, I don't really want to bring a game that you can't play nowadays, to the indie quest. So I was like, you know what? Let's bring an awesome game that got me super pumped about for indie back in the day. I guess it's not even that old. It's from 2014. Shovel Knight.
Yeah.
This game was developed by Yacht Club Games. It's a Kickstarter success story. They started with this Kickstarter of $75K and a little prototype and some footage, and they ended up getting over $300K for their campaign, which is pretty cool success story.
No kidding. So one of my most embarrassing egg on my face moments, one of my all-time worst predictions, is I remember hearing about the Kickstarter for Shovel Knight and thinking to myself, I guess it's kind of funny that it's a knight that uses a shovel instead of a sword, but that seems kind of gimmicky. I'm sure that game isn't going anywhere. Swing and a miss.
Well, it went lots of places. I feel like might be one of the most critically lauded indie games out there. I feel like this is one of the best reviewed indie games. So if you're listening to this podcast, you've heard about this game, I'm sure. I mean, it helped launch the Switch. They put the Treasure Trove out on Switch, which was the main game and all the DLC, which I'll talk a little bit about in a little bit. But let's talk about what the game is before we jump into any of that stuff. It's an 8-bit style game. It's kind of reminiscent of the NES era. Of course, it's a little bit more detailed. I would say a lot more detailed than an NES game, but there's a lot of inspirations from DuckTales NES, because you got the downward strike for the shovel that you can bounce off of. They got the overworld that's like Super Mario Bros. 3, and it's kind of like Mega Man, where you can get power-ups, which are called relics in here, which you find throughout the different stages that are kind of similar to the bosses. We got 10 bosses you can fight. You got the Black Knight, Spectre Knight, King Knight, Treasure Knight, Plague Knight, Mole Knight, Polar Knight, Tinker Knight, Propeller Knight, and the Enchantress. which I have it written down. I didn't remember that, so don't think I just have like this amazing memory.
I was going to say, I don't see that in our notes doc, but you just rattled those off fast. Way to go.
But yeah, you get relics that are kind of similar to what their power-ups are like, and then you have a magic pool that you can, use those powers, kind of like a Mega Man game where you get like the leaf shield and stuff in those games. So I mean, it takes a lot of inspiration, and then it makes its own thing, and it has a storyline that goes through that's kind of tragic and a little sad at the end, and a little very dramatic. And I just think this game is just I would qualify it as probably one of my favorite games of all time. So,
I mean that checks out. Yeah, everything you said is true. It's just a phenomenal game. I mean, I definitely had to eat crow with my terrible opinions on it when I heard about the Kickstarter as soon as I played it, because it's just kind of a masterclass.
Yeah, they nailed it from all aspects, from the gameplay to the music. The soundtrack is just it's bad. It's pumping, man. It's composed by Jake Kaufman for the most part, and these are some of like the most iconic chiptunes tracks you'll probably ever hear. They bring the jams, they bring the mood, they bring the awesome like epic feelings during the moments that it's needed. But listening to this soundtrack, you're gonna want to like get in your car, blast this, and just feel like a badass, because this is some great music. And it also has some two main contributions from a Mega Man composer, Manami. How do you say that? Manami Matsume. Okay, yeah, I'm terrible at Japanese names, but she helped put contributions into two different tracks on the actual soundtrack, and so you get that Mega Man like influence there too. So I mean, this soundtrack is just like easily recommendable. It's just like easily re-listenable. I think it's one of the most listenable soundtracks I have. I think I've probably played it thousands of times at this point listening to it. So just excellent music.
Definitely. It's, sometimes you hear a game soundtrack and it's kind of like that main theme is really catchy, and then some of the other music is a little more background. But with Shovel Knight's soundtrack, it's like every single song on that soundtrack would be the single that they played on the radio. Like, it is nothing but hits the whole way through, and everything is so catchy. It's almost unfair.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to compare this soundtrack to others, like other 8-bit soundtracks. It's like, yeah, but it's not quite Shovel Knight,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but dude, this game is so good. Like they had so much success that they have like 3 DLC spin-offs that are pretty much full games. Have you played any of those?
No, I know I should. There's no reason not to, but I've only ever played the base game.
So I have personally played Plague of Shadows, which is basically they take the Plague Knight and it's its own, like basically what they do with these DLCs is they take one of the bad guys and make a whole story around them, So the Plague Knight one is kind of a remix of the first game. It is its own game. It has its own storyline, and it has mechanics based around like his potion mechanic where you can like throw potions at people and stuff. But it's pretty much just remixes of the base stages, kind of with his mechanics in mind. It's not super fresh, And then you got the Spectre of Torment, which is kind of a more Castlevania feel to it, which is Spectre Knight. And they have all new stages for Spectre Knight and an amazing story. I feel like out of all the DLCs, even the base game, I think that's probably my favorite like story and gameplay feel and everything of Shovel Knight. And I just had a great time. I actually played that on an extra live stream. I've only done a few extra live streams, but I played through I was going to play like 30 minutes of it just to try it out, and I ended up sitting down for like 7 hours and playing through the entire thing on an extra live stream. And dude, it blew me away. The story like is very like emotional and awesome. Like I feel like they keep ramping up more and more. And then the newest one that just came out this year is King of Cards, which I put about 3 or 4 hours into, and I was like not super feeling the moveset. I feel like I couldn't quite get the feel for it because he's King Knight, the main character in that. He's kind of fatter and his jumps are a little bit like more squatty, I guess. He does like a spin attack and stuff. So, I mean, I kept getting stuck on this one stage and I kind of gave up, but I feel like I'll go back and beat it sometime. But dude, this game is probably the best value, well, at least one of them for indie games. You buy the treasure trove and you get like 4 games. And there's also like another spin-off game you get in there that's called, what is it? Shovel Knight Showdown, which is pretty much like a little mini Smash Brothers where you play with all the bad guys and main characters and fight each other.
It blows my mind how well supported this game has been over time. I mean, it's not often that a game comes out and as like a follow-up to the game, as part of its post-release content, you get what is essentially like 3.5 to 4 full other games that you can play. It's just bonkers.
The thing is with their Kickstarter, right, they did promise that they were going to do 3 spin-off games. And then people were like kind of skeptical, like, what are they going to be, right? Like, they're just going to be like little mini, small side adventures. And then they're just like, no, they spent years like developing these crazy, like, just intensive and, you know, full-fledged games. And it's just a crazy value and a crazy thing that they did for their Kickstarter backers and then made them super successful. And people were kind of frustrated, like, dude, you guys have been working on Shovel Knight for like 6 years, 7 years, whatever it's been. Like, do something else. But the people that have been following the DLC, like, for myself personally, I think these games are all awesome. And it's just, I don't need to say that this is going to be like on the main quest, because you guys know it's going to be before even Steve asked me it's going to be, unless you disagree with me.
No, I hard to argue that it would be a main quest game. I think we kind of knew going into this episode that we were going to bring a couple of main quest games, right?
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times when we do these episodes that we're probably going to have games that are probably going to be on the main quest, but there will be times where we're like, hey, let's both play this, or hey, why don't you play that? And then it might end up on the side quest, so you never know. But these were like classic games. Like, dude, this got me into like platformers more than I probably had been since Super Mario World. Like, I love platformers and Donkey Kong, all that back in the day, but I hadn't really played much of that like up to Shovel Knight. So when Shovel Knight happened, I was like, dude. And then of course Meat Boy as well. I guess they're kind of like a few years apart from each other, but I played Meat Boy and I loved it. And then I got Shovel Knight and I was like, dude, I just need to play more platformers. So ever since this came out, I just like seek this style of game out. And I feel like people that have that classic inspiration just really bring a lot to the table. And this is a shining example of that.
100%. Absolutely. And if for some reason you haven't played Shovel Knight, hey, now you know that you need to go play it. But yeah, I mean, maybe you already know of the character Shovel Knight because he's in like 100 other indie games. He gets around. But yeah, this is where it comes from. And it's now your responsibility to go play it because it's so good.
Yeah, like you're playing ukulele and you see Shovel Knight, you're like, who's that guy? This is where he came from. So, Rusty Lewis, if you're listening, go play Shovel Knight because that's the character. That's where he came from.
We got you.
So, Steve, how'd you feel about this episode, man? I feel like we talked and got a little nostalgic, brought back some fond memories of some classic indie stuff. How do you feel, man?
You hit the nail on the head right there. Nostalgic is the perfect word. I mean, as I was starting to think about this episode over the last couple days, I was, it's taken me back to all these old games I used to love. I actually got real nostalgic and started watching some like old YouTube videos from old YouTubers I used to watch, or still watch, but just their older stuff. Like, I was really taking myself back 10, 15 years ago and getting in the spirit of it. It's been a lot of fun talking through these games. I mean, no surprise we have 2 main quests here. It's kind of an inevitability if we're going to go back and pull things that were really influential for us. You can probably assume that they're ones that we highly recommend. But yeah, how about you?
Oh yeah, it's awesome to think back. I feel like I'm an overly sentimental person as it is, so I'm always being a little nostalgic pretty much 90% of the time. So getting the opportunity to dive deep and like look up old games and just say, oh, I remember that, and just have fond memories. But dude, doing that, I did realize that I had a lot of holes in my backlog. So I feel like in the future we need to do an episode. I'm just throwing out ideas for episodes today. Why not? We should do an episode where we each come up with like a pile of shame lists, like games that we should have went back in the day like played, but we didn't, and then the other person would like select one for the other host. What do you think about that?
I love that. Although I'm a little bit worried because I think Minecraft would end up being on my pile of shame.
I know. Is that it? That's a conversation. I guess it might be for another day. But is Minecraft an indie game now? Do you think it is?
These days, I would say it's probably not anymore, but it definitely was. To be fair, I have played a little Minecraft. I played it literally when it was an alpha that you had to go to the website and like pay $20 to get the download for.
Yeah.
But then it was an indie game. Now it's kind of it's a Minecraft basically. There's only one of them and it is what it is. Maybe you could say the same about Five Nights at Freddy's. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think I would give you that one, honestly. Unless we decided, hey, we're going to sit down and do a deep dive Minecraft episode, which I don't know, we might. That I don't want to promise too much, but I do think the idea of doing like, here's our pile of shame, and we'll probably do this in the next month or two, I think. Like, hey, here's a pile of shame. Let's the next episode come back and just like, talk about whatever game we select or whatever.
Yeah, I like it. Everyone has to listen to us always recommending games that we have played. But then now everyone can get a little bit of a chuckle out of the huge holes in our backlog, that things you might be surprised that we've never played. So I love that plan. I think we've got ourselves an episode.
Sweet. And dude, there's going to be some you're going to be like, really, Josh, you haven't played that? So I think that's going to be fun to have that conversation. Anyway, I'm thinking ahead too much. I had a great time with this episode. I think it's time to wrap it up. So guys, it's time for Pluggy Plugs. Thanks for listening to the show. You can find me on Twitter at Frantic Society, doing the things that I do. Too Many Podcast, ranting, making memes, And how about you, Steve? Where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter as Blinkoom. It's OOM like Mary. Same on Twitch. I stream every Tuesday, Thursday, Friday at 7 Central. Blinkoom's the name over there too. Yeah. Come give it a follow. Come say hi. If you want to be involved with the show, you got a couple different options. One, you can always check out the quest log at bit.ly/questlog to see all of the past main quest and side quest games that we've talked about in previous episodes and get a recommendation. Or if you want to reach out to the show, you can do so on Twitter at IndieQuestPod.
Also, we want community feedback, suggestions, questions, comments, concerns, anything. You have a random thought about an indie game, send it to us. If you have a question about our favorite food, we'll try to answer it for you. Send that email over at indiequestpod@gmail.com, and I'm sure we're going to get an email about our favorite food now. I guess I just willed that into existence. Also, you might hear those on the show. We want to read your stuff on the show, like we did at the top with the iTunes review. Also, we are a part of the Polykill Network now, so you'll find our podcast on polykill.com. Steve, why don't you sign us off and say goodbye to the good folks out there?
Yeah, thanks for taking a trip down memory lane. Nostalgia truly is the best medicine for whatever that ails you. So, yeah, just be nostalgic, have fun, take care, and email us your Xbox Live Arcade memories at indiequestpod@gmail.com. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. You will do a bunch of incredibly, like, oh, fuck, Josh, what's wrong with you today?